I was 21 years old when this happened, and even now, years later, I can still remember every sound, every shadow, and every second of that night with terrifying clarity. At the time, I was living with my parents while attending college. Our house sat on a quiet, upscale street where every property was separated by large stretches of land. Behind our backyard was a small private pond shared only by a handful of expensive homes. Across the water sat a tiny public park that looked peaceful during the day, but became an empty black silhouette after sunset. Because my parents owned several homes and traveled frequently, I often found myself alone in the house for days at a time. Normally, I enjoyed the solitude. That night changed everything. It was sometime during the summer break. I don't remember the exact date, only that the air was warm, the windows were open, and a gentle breeze drifted through the sunroom, the coziest room in the entire house. I was curled up on the corner of the couch, watching television completely relaxed. Then I heard it. Splash. Another splash. Then another. At first, I ignored it. Ducks and geese often landed in the pond, and they sometimes fought loudly enough to shake the water. But after another 30 seconds, something felt wrong. The splashes were too heavy, too rhythmic, too deliberate. I muted the television. Silence filled the room except for the steady sound of water being disturbed outside. I slowly leaned toward the window until my ear was almost touching the glass. Splash, splash, splash. Those weren't the movements of an animal. They sounded like powerful strokes made by someone swimming. A person. In our pond. I opened the sliding door and stepped cautiously onto the wooden deck. Darkness swallowed almost everything beyond the porch. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, leaving only vague outlines of trees reflected across the black water. Then another sound reached me. Someone was humming. A man's voice. Low, calm, almost peaceful. The combination of humming and swimming was somehow far more disturbing than shouting would have been. Whoever he wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't scared of being caught. He sounded comfortable, like he belonged there, except he didn't. Each homeowner owned a section of that pond. Nobody swam there. Not the neighbors. Not children. No one. I hurried back inside and switched on the deck lights. The bright floodlights illuminated part of the shoreline. Instantly, the humming stopped. The splashing stopped. Complete silence. He had seen me. I stared into the darkness, searching for movement, but whoever had been in the water had disappeared. Trying to convince myself it was probably just one of the neighbors doing something unbelievably strange, I locked the sliding door, checked every window, and texted my brother away at college. Someone was swimming in the pond. No response. I tried watching television again. Impossible. Every instinct inside me screamed that something wasn't right. Outside, the darkness seemed almost alive. The television continued glowing, turning the entire sunroom into a brightly lit display case. Suddenly, I realized something terrifying. Anyone outside could see me perfectly, but I couldn't see them. I grabbed the remote and shut the television off. The room instantly fell into darkness. For several seconds, my eyes struggled to adjust. Then I heard it. Breathing. Not inside the house. Outside. Right beyond one of the windows. Heavy. Slow. Deliberate. Someone was standing only inches away from the glass. Every muscle in my body froze. I dropped flat onto the couch, barely daring to breathe. Maybe he hadn't seen me. The silence stretched on. Then, a deep male voice calmly whispered through the darkness. I see you. Every ounce of warmth drained from my body. It felt as if my heart had stopped beating altogether. Out of pure panic, I shouted the first thing that came into my mind. Paul, is that you? Paul was one of our neighbors. I desperately wanted this to be some twisted joke. No answer. Only slow footsteps. Bare feet against wooden boards. Step, step. Step gradually fading into the darkness. I stayed frozen for what felt like an eternity before forcing myself to move. Adrenaline exploded through my body. I sprinted to the front door. Locked. Side entrance. Locked. Garage entrance. Locked. I texted my parents and every member of my family. Finally, my father replied. His advice surprised me. Turn on the backyard lights. Go check. He wanted me to protect the house. Looking back now, that was probably the last thing I should have done. Still gripping my phone, I grabbed the largest kitchen knife I could find. Every instinct told me not to open that door. I ignored it. The deck lights flooded the backyard once again. For several moments, everything appeared empty. Then I looked down. Wet footprints. Bare footprints. Fresh. They stretched across the wooden deck, already beginning to dry around the edges. Whoever had been outside had stood there only minutes earlier. I slowly followed the trail. Every step felt heavier than the last. The footprints led toward the side of the deck. I tightened my grip around the knife. Then I looked over the edge. I will never forget what I saw. Only the upper half of a man's face was visible. His forehead. His eyes. Nothing else. He'd been crouching underneath the deck, waiting, watching, listening. He wasn't hiding from me. He was hiding from me. The instant our eyes met, time seemed to stop. His expression never changed. He simply turned his head and disappeared beneath the deck without making a sound. That single image haunted me for years. I slammed the doors shut, locked every entrance again, and called 911 before even contacting my parents. When the officers arrived, relief washed over me. They searched the property with flashlights, questioned me about possible enemies, disputes, or suspicious neighbors, but they found nothing. No suspect. No explanation. Only footprints. That night, every window remained shut despite the summer heat. The air conditioner ran until morning. I don't think I slept more than an hour. When sunlight finally poured through the windows, it felt like surviving until daylight after a nightmare. Whoever that man was, he never came back. Or at least, I never saw him again. But sometimes I still wonder whether he had planned to leave, or whether I interrupted something much worse. The second incident happened years later, and unlike the first one, this one didn't begin with seeing someone. It began with hearing a single word. I own a dog that I walk 3 times every day. Morning, afternoon, night. Every walk follows exactly the same route. We leave through the driveway, pass into a quiet cul-de-sac that opens into the condominium parking lot, loop around the parked cars, and return home. It's a routine we've followed for years. Because the parking lot has almost no lighting, I always carry a flashlight. I also wear only one earbud so I can stay aware of my surroundings. That habit may have saved me. It was late, far later than most people would walk their dogs. The neighborhood was unnaturally quiet. No engines, no conversations, no televisions. Just insects humming somewhere in the darkness. My flashlight swept across rows of parked vehicles as my dog casually sniffed along the pavement. At first I thought I heard someone speaking. The music in my earbud drowned most of it out. I stopped walking, removed the earbud, listened. Nothing. I convinced myself I had imagined it. We continued. A few more steps. Then a voice. Soft, weak, barely above a whisper. Help, I froze. The word echoed between the parked cars. My flashlight jerked wildly from one vehicle to another. No movement. No child. No adult. No one. The parking lot was completely empty. My pulse hammered inside my ears. Against every survival instinct, I slowly walked forward. Something about the voice felt wrong. Not because someone needed help, because it sounded almost artificial, like someone trying to sound helpless. I stopped again. This time the flashlight remained fixed between 2 parked SUVs. The darkness there seemed unusually deep. Then I heard it again. Help. This time closer. From somewhere to my left. Between the cars. My breathing became shallow. Every horror story I'd ever heard flashed through my mind. Predators sometimes lure victims by pretending to be injured. Others use recordings. Some imitate children because they know compassionate people will investigate. Was someone hiding? Watching? Waiting for someone to step closer? I couldn't tell. Then it came again. 3 times. Help. 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 Each repetition seemed slightly louder. Slightly closer. I wasn't the only one hearing it anymore. My dog's ears suddenly shot straight up. His body stiffened. His nose pointed directly toward the same row of parked vehicles. His tail stopped moving. He wasn't barking. He wasn't growling. He was simply staring. Animals don't understand ghost stories. They don't imagine things. If my dog had locked onto the same direction as the voice, then something was truly there. I slowly raised the flashlight. The beam crawled across bumpers, windshields, license plates, dark windows, searching for even the smallest sign of movement. And then, I thought I saw something shift between 2 vehicles. Not enough to identify, just enough to convince me that whatever had been calling for help was no longer alone. The moment my dog and I finally turned and ran, my mind began replaying everything I had just heard. At first, all I could think about was escaping. But once the adrenaline started fading, something far more disturbing settled into my thoughts. That voice. It wasn't right. The more I replayed it in my head, the less it sounded like an actual child. It was impossible to explain. It carried the innocence of a young kid, yet beneath it was something unnaturally mature, almost as if an adult were forcing themselves to imitate a child's voice but couldn't quite hide their real tone. The result was something that existed somewhere in between, and that wasn't even the strangest part. Every single time it spoke, it sounded exactly the same. Not almost the same. Exactly. The same volume. The same pause. The same emotionless delivery. The same strange, muffled quality. It never cracked with fear. It never trembled. It never became desperate. It simply repeated one word. Help again. Help again. Help. No crying. No panic. No urgency. Just the exact same recording-like statement over and over. That realization made my blood run cold. People asking for help don't sound like that. Real fear changes a person's voice. Real panic creates emotion. This felt rehearsed. Or worse, engineered. My dog and I practically sprinted the rest of the way home. The moment I walked through the front door, I started explaining everything to my mom as quickly as I could. She listened carefully, but her expression remained somewhere between confused and skeptical. I suggested calling the police. Maybe someone was trapped inside one of those vehicles. Maybe a child had somehow gotten locked in a car. Maybe someone genuinely needed help. But my mom didn't think it was necessary. She believed there were too many ordinary explanations. Maybe sound had echoed from somewhere else. Maybe someone had been playing a prank. Maybe I had misunderstood what I'd heard. I wanted to believe that. I truly did. But one question refused to leave my mind. Why was the voice muffled? If someone had been standing outside, why did it sound as though layers of metal surrounded them? If someone had been inside a vehicle, why didn't they cry louder once they realized another person was nearby? And if no one was actually there, then what exactly had my dog and I heard? That question has followed me ever since. Sometimes I wonder whether someone was hiding between those large pickup trucks and SUVs waiting for an unsuspecting person to step closer. Other times, I wonder whether the voice was never meant to be followed at all, only heard, only enough to lure someone deeper into the darkness. I still avoid thinking about that night for too long. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. I even went back during daylight and took photographs of the exact locations. The first picture marked the spot where I had stopped walking, removed my earbud, and first heard the voice somewhere ahead and to my left. The second showed where I cautiously moved closer before hearing the same word repeated from among the parked vehicles. Some people later suggested the sound might have come from the condominium complex on the opposite side. That theory never convinced me. Both my dog and I reacted toward the parked cars, not toward the buildings. Standing there in daylight, it became obvious how difficult visibility would have been that night. Large trucks and SUVs filled nearly every parking space. Their tall frames created narrow corridors of darkness between them, perfect places for someone, or something, to remain completely hidden. To this day, I have never found an explanation that satisfies me. And honestly, I'm not sure I want one anymore. What I'm about to tell you is the reason my parents abandoned a house that had belonged to our family for 3 generations. Even after all these years, speaking about it still sends a chill through me. As a child, I struggled with severe depression. I constantly carried the crushing feeling that I didn't matter, that I was invisible. Thankfully, life eventually became much better. But during those years, loneliness was my closest companion. I spent most of my time isolated in my bedroom. Our house stood deep in a heavily wooded area. Trees surrounded 3 sides of the property. A dense forest separated us from the nearest neighbors, swallowing every sound once darkness arrived. During the day, the woods looked beautiful. At night, they became an endless black wall. My bedroom sat in the back corner of the house. 2 different walls contained large windows facing directly into the forest. As a child already terrified of the dark, it often felt as though the woods were staring back. Everything began when I was around 10 years old. I was old enough that nightmares were supposed to be embarrassing. Too old to climb into my parents' bed. Too young to understand genuine danger. The first strange event seemed harmless. I owned a small nightlight with several LED color settings. Every evening before bed, I always selected red. Always. It became part of my routine. One night I woke unexpectedly sometime after midnight. Half asleep, I noticed something odd. The room wasn't glowing red anymore. The nightlight had somehow changed to another color. I assumed I had accidentally pressed the button earlier and drifted back to sleep. A week later, it happened again. Then again. Each time I woke, the color had mysteriously changed. When I asked my parents why they kept touching it during the night, both looked genuinely confused. Neither admitted to changing it. Instead, they insisted the light had always been unreliable. It probably glitched. That explanation seemed reasonable. At first, then one morning I woke up to find the nightlight unplugged and lying on the floor beneath the outlet. No damage. No broken cord. Simply unplugged. Again, my parents dismissed my concerns. My father laughed. "You don't need a nightlight anymore." A few days later, It disappeared completely. Not unplugged, not hidden beneath furniture. Gone, vanished. I searched every room in the house. Nothing. At that point, I became convinced my parents had secretly thrown it away because they thought I had outgrown it. They denied everything. The argument that followed became one of the biggest fights we'd ever had. Both sides accused the other of lying. Neither of us backed down. Eventually, everyone stopped talking about it. For about a week, then the real nightmare began. Every single night, I woke up, always at nearly the same time, always for no apparent reason. At first, I assumed it was coincidence. My parents blamed puberty, hormones, stress, growing pains, every explanation except the one I desperately needed them to consider. The fifth night, instead of forcing myself back to sleep, I remained perfectly still, listening, waiting. Minutes passed. Then a faint scratching sound. Rustle, rustle, rustle. It was coming from my closet, soft enough that I almost convinced myself I imagined it. The next night, the same sound. Then the next. Then the next. Every night I woke, and every night something quietly shifted inside that closet. I begged my parents to believe me. They didn't. My father finally lost his patience. One evening he stormed into my bedroom, grabbed my arm, and marched me directly toward the closet. "There is nothing in here," he shouted. He ripped clothes off hangers, pulled toys from shelves, threw boxes across the room. Old games, stuffed animals, books, everything. His anger echoed through the house. Then he grabbed an old poster taped against the back wall. With one violent pull, it came away. Everything stopped. The room fell completely silent. My father's face drained of color. My mother froze beside him. Behind the poster wasn't drywall. It wasn't insulation. It wasn't even a crack. It was a hole. A massive, perfectly hidden opening leading into complete darkness. The flashlight beam disappeared into it without revealing an end. The tunnel stretched far beyond what any of us expected. None of us spoke. My mother suddenly screamed. My father grabbed a flashlight and rushed outside. A few minutes later, he called for us with a voice I'd never heard before, shaking, terrified. At the base of the house, hidden beneath bushes and loose soil, he had discovered another opening. Someone had dug a narrow tunnel from the forest directly into the wall behind my bedroom closet. Someone had been able to crawl from the woods into my room without using a door, without opening a window, without making enough noise for anyone else to notice. Suddenly, every strange thing made horrifying sense. The changing nightlight, the unplugged cord, the missing lamp, the nightly awakenings, the rustling inside the closet. Something or someone had been entering that hidden space while I slept. Whether they ever watched me, whether they ever stepped fully into my room, whether they had been there on the nights I woke up, those are questions I have never wanted answered. My mother refused to spend another night in that house. We packed only what we absolutely needed and drove to my aunt's home before sunrise. I never slept in that bedroom again. Within weeks, my parents sold the property despite it having belonged to our family for 3 generations. No amount of history was worth staying. Looking back now, what terrifies me most isn't the tunnel itself. It's realizing that children often wake for reasons they cannot explain. Parents usually blame nightmares, growing pains, an overactive imagination. But sometimes, a child wakes because something else in the room has already been awake for much longer. And that possibility still haunts me more than any ghost story ever could. Eventually, I know I'll have to come to terms with what happened. Right now, though, it's still easier not to think about it. My parents have never spoken about that house again. If I ever bring it up, the conversation dies almost immediately. They change the subject, excuse themselves, or pretend they don't remember the details. I think I know why. Deep down, they blame themselves. For over a month, I woke up almost every night telling them something was wrong. I described the noises, the strange changes in my room, the feeling that someone or something was there. Like most parents, they searched for reasonable explanations. They assumed it was nightmares, puberty, an overactive imagination, or the loneliness of a child frightened by the dark. Reason is comforting. Reality wasn't. After discovering the hidden tunnel behind my closet, every unexplained event suddenly fit together like pieces of a nightmare that had been waiting for someone to solve it. Someone had been entering my room, night after night, while I slept. That realization is more horrifying than any ghost story. Whoever they were, they never took anything valuable. They never spoke. They never attacked me, which somehow makes the entire situation even more terrifying. If they weren't there to steal, why were they there? Did they simply watch? Did they stand beside my bed while I slept? Did I wake up because I sensed another person breathing in the darkness without consciously understanding why? Those are questions I will probably carry for the rest of my life. Sometimes people dismiss children because their fears sound impossible, but children often notice things adults overlook. If your son or daughter repeatedly tells you that something feels wrong, listen. You don't have to believe every explanation, but you should always believe their fear. Sometimes fear exists for a reason. My name is Leo. To be honest, I'm still trying to figure out where my life is supposed to go. Home has never felt like home. For the last 3 years, I've done everything possible to stay away from my family. The situation there is complicated, painful, and exhausting in ways I don't really want to explain. Friends I once trusted have slowly become strangers. My hometown feels smaller every year, like it has nothing left waiting for me. I'm about to enter my senior year of college, yet I have absolutely no idea what comes next. Sometimes I feel as though everyone else has already found their purpose while I'm still wandering in circles. Maybe that's why I ended up in Berlin. Officially, I told people I wanted to travel. The truth, I think I was searching for somewhere that felt like I belonged. Or maybe I was just trying to outrun the version of myself I had left behind. Neither worked. One rainy evening, I found myself sitting alone inside a small bar called Ruya. The place was warm, noisy, and crowded enough that no one paid attention to the lonely foreigner sitting by himself. I had a few drinks, thought about my future, thought about my past, then decided it was time to leave. Outside, the streets had become strangely quiet. As I reached into my pocket, my stomach dropped. My apartment keys were gone. I checked every pocket twice. Nothing. Wonderful. I walked all the way back anyway, hoping I'd somehow overlooked them. No luck. The building was locked. The property manager was unavailable. It was far too late to get another key. Then the rain started. Not a light drizzle. A steady, cold rain that soaked through my clothes within minutes. I wandered the unfamiliar streets looking for somewhere dry. Eventually, I found a bridge crossing a narrow river. Beneath it was enough shelter from the rain to spend the night. Not comfortable, not safe, but dry. At that point, dry was good enough. I leaned against the concrete wall and slowly drifted towards sleep. That's when I heard voices. Faint at first, almost carried away by the river. Curious, I carefully lifted my head. Across the water stood 5 men. Beside them floated a small boat tied to the riverbank. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then I noticed several duffel bags, briefcases, constant exchanges, quick conversations, nervous glances. Even though my German wasn't fluent, I didn't need to understand every word. Body language tells its own story. Something illegal was happening. Very illegal. I stayed perfectly still. Moving now would only attract attention. I convinced myself that if I remained silent, they'd finish their business and disappear. For several minutes, that's exactly what happened, until everything changed. One man suddenly shouted. His voice echoed across the river. Another man instantly pulled a handgun. The atmosphere shifted from business to execution. The man at gunpoint slowly raised his hands, speaking rapidly in desperate German. He sounded terrified. The others surrounded him. They stripped him of his jacket, his wallet, his phone, everything. Whatever agreement had existed moments earlier had completely collapsed. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. Very slowly, I began backing away. Then, one of them looked directly toward my side of the river. Our eyes met. He shouted something. Even through the language barrier, I understood enough. Someone's there. Everything exploded into motion. Without thinking, I turned and ran. Branches whipped against my face. My shoes slipped across wet pavement. Behind me, I heard yelling. The only words I clearly understood were, "Don't shoot." Whether those words were directed at me or at one of the armed men, I'll never know. I didn't stop running. Not once. Eventually, exhaustion caught me first. I collapsed beside another street and vomited from panic, alcohol, and adrenaline. I stayed hidden until sunrise. Looking back now, I realize how unbelievably lucky I was. Those men could have eliminated the only witness without anyone ever knowing. Instead, for whatever reason, they let me disappear into the night. Sometimes I wonder if fate simply wasn't finished with me yet. Other times, I think I was only one bad decision away from becoming another missing tourist whose story never made the news. It was an ordinary Friday afternoon at my high school. At least, that's how it began. My friend Emma and I were walking through one of the hallways after lunch. She was chatting about something I honestly wasn't paying attention to. My mind was somewhere else entirely. Life at home with my foster parents had become unbearable. School wasn't much better. Every day felt like something I simply had to survive. As we passed the cafeteria, I realized I needed to use the restroom. Emma laughed and said she'd wait outside. Nothing unusual. I pushed open the bathroom door. Immediately, something felt strange. Silence. Complete silence. Anyone who has ever attended a busy high school knows that bathrooms are almost never empty. Yet this one was every stall, every sink, every mirror, empty. I shrugged it off and entered the last stall. Only a few seconds later, I heard the entrance door swing open. Someone had entered. The footsteps stopped. No toilet flushed. No sink turned on. No stall door closed. Just silence. I assumed whoever it was had ducked inside to avoid a teacher or administrator. It wasn't uncommon. I finished, stood up, buttoned my jeans, and absent-mindedly read the graffiti covering the stall walls. Names. Profanity. Complaints about teachers. Typical high school stuff. Then, the bathroom door opened again. Closed again. I assumed whoever had come in had finally left. When I stepped out of the stall, the bathroom was completely empty. I washed my hands and walked outside. Emma was standing there. She looked pale, not confused, not amused, terrified. What I asked. She stared at me for several seconds before quietly saying, "Who was standing behind you?" I laughed. "What are you talking about?" "In your stall." My smile disappeared. There wasn't anyone. She didn't laugh. She didn't smile. She looked me directly in the eyes. I came into the bathroom because I realized I had to go too. I looked toward your stall. There was someone standing directly behind you. I felt every hair on my arm stand up. What? They were so close, their shoes were touching yours. She said she froze. She assumed I knew the person. She didn't want to interrupt something awkward, so she quietly backed out of the bathroom. Only seconds later, I walked out alone. No one else emerged. No other stall opened. No footsteps. Nothing. I explained everything I'd heard. The bathroom door opening. Someone entering, then leaving. Emma shook her head. No one came out. My stomach dropped. We reported it to one of the school administrators. She politely dismissed it. Emma must have mistaken a shadow. Someone probably slipped out unnoticed. Teenagers imagine things. Logical explanations. Reasonable explanations. Except Emma wasn't known for inventing stories. If anything, she rarely took anything seriously. That's why the fear on her face frightened me more than the story itself. She believed exactly what she had seen, and for the first time, so did I. Years have passed. I'm 18 now. I've experienced plenty of frightening moments since then, yet none of them have stayed with me like the image of someone silently standing inches behind me. While I never sensed they were there at all, sometimes what terrifies us most isn't what we see. It's realizing how close danger or something far stranger can stand before we ever become aware of its presence. The next story happened years ago when I rented my very first house after landing my first real full-time job. At first glance, the place seemed perfect. Small, affordable, comfortable. A single-story home with 2 modest bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and just enough living space for someone starting a new chapter in life. The neighborhood was quiet, almost too quiet. The woman who rented the property to me, I'll call her Michelle, was warm, polite, and surprisingly protective of the house. She admitted she preferred renting to another woman because it made her feel safer about the property. I appreciated her honesty. For the first few weeks, everything felt completely normal. Looking back now, that's exactly what makes what happened afterward so terrifying. Because the most frightening stories rarely begin with screams. They begin with ordinary days that slowly stop feeling ordinary at all. At first, it was nothing more than a single knock. Just one ordinary sound. The kind of thing most people would forget within minutes. Looking back now, I wish I had forgotten it too. I had been living in the little rental house for only a few weeks. It was my first place after landing my first real full-time job, and I was proud of finally having a space that belonged entirely to me. The house itself was modest, a single-story home with 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and just enough room to feel cozy without feeling cramped. The neighborhood was quiet, almost unnaturally quiet. My landlord, whom I'll call Michelle, had been incredibly kind from the beginning. She explained that she preferred renting the property to another woman because it made her feel more comfortable knowing her house was being cared for. She seemed genuine, and during those first weeks I never had a reason to question anything. Until one ordinary weeknight. I had just settled onto the couch after dinner when someone knocked on my front door. 3 slow knocks. Not loud, not frantic, just deliberate. I froze. It was already late enough that no one should have been visiting. I walked quietly toward the door, stopping just before reaching it. "Who's there?" I called. Silence. Not even footsteps walking away. I stood there for nearly a minute listening. Nothing. Normally, curiosity would have gotten the better of me, but there was one problem. The front door had no peephole, no glass panel, nothing that allowed me to see who was outside. The storm door in front of it wasn't much help either. It didn't even lock. Opening the door would have meant exposing myself completely to whoever was standing outside. I wasn't willing to do that. Eventually, I convinced myself someone had knocked on the wrong house. The next morning, I grabbed my purse, locked the house behind me, and reached for the storm door. That's when I saw it. A large yellow post-it note carefully taped to the glass. The words were written in thick black marker. "Hello, beautiful." My stomach immediately tightened. The knock from the previous night suddenly made perfect sense. Someone hadn't come to the wrong address. They had come for me. I crumpled the note into a ball and threw it into the trash before driving to work, trying to convince myself it was nothing more than some immature prank. It wasn't. That evening while I was making dinner, the knocking returned. 3 knocks. Exactly the same. Slow measured. Patient. This time I didn't speak. I quietly walked to the door and listened. Nothing. No footsteps. No breathing. No sound at all. It was as though whoever had knocked had vanished the instant I approached. For the first time, the word stalker entered my mind. I called my parents. Neither of them knew what to tell me. My father, a retired police officer with decades of experience, sounded unusually serious. If you call the police now, he explained, there isn't much they can do unless they actually catch the person while it's happening. He advised me to avoid going outside after dark, never answer unexpected knocks, and if it continued, he'd drive to town himself. I followed his advice exactly. The following morning before leaving for work, I reluctantly looked toward the storm door. Another note, waiting for me. This one read, "I like to watch you." Every hair on my body stood up. Someone wasn't simply visiting my house. Someone had been observing me, watching me, learning my routine, knowing exactly when I was home. I photographed the note immediately. I sent it to my parents. Then I sent it to Michelle. I asked her if she had ever dealt with an obsessive ex-boyfriend, a stalker, or anyone who might still believe she lived there. Her response came almost immediately. She sounded genuinely shocked. She insisted she'd never had anyone stalking her and explained she had been in a long-term relationship for years. She couldn't understand why someone would be leaving notes at the house. Even so, a part of me wondered whether she simply wasn't telling me everything. That afternoon, hoping to clear up what I believed might be a misunderstanding, I taped my own note to the front door before going inside. "If you're looking for Michelle, she doesn't live here anymore. She only owns this property. If you continue coming here, I will contact the police." For the first time in days, I felt a little safer. That night, no knocking, no footsteps, no sounds outside. I actually managed to sleep. The next morning, I smiled to myself, convinced my message had worked. I stepped outside to remove my note. Then my smile disappeared. It wasn't my note anymore. Someone had removed it. In its place was another handwritten message. "I'm not looking for Michelle." Below that, my name. Then one final sentence. "I like watching you." My knees nearly gave out beneath me. This wasn't random anymore. Whoever this person was knew exactly who I was. They knew my name. They knew where I lived. They knew my schedule. And somehow, they were always close enough to approach the front door without me ever seeing them. I immediately sent a photograph to my father. Within hours, he packed a bag and drove straight to my house. By the time I returned from work, he was already waiting inside. I barely accomplished anything that day. Every person I passed suddenly looked suspicious. Every stranger became a possibility. Even one of my coworkers, Fernando, crossed my mind simply because he'd always made me uncomfortable. Paranoia spreads quickly once someone invades your sense of safety. That evening, my father suggested we wait until after dark before calling the police. If the stalker was nearby, we wanted them to see police officers at the property. Only one officer arrived. Apparently, it had been a busy night. The officer took photographs, collected the notes, asked dozens of questions, and filed a report. Having my father there, a retired police officer, certainly helped ensure the report was taken seriously. After the officer left, my father refused to come inside. Instead, he sat on the front steps for hours, watching, waiting, listening. If someone returned, they would have to walk directly toward him. No one ever did, at least not that night. Within a week, I began packing. No job, no lease, no convenience. Was worth living inside a house where an invisible stranger knew my name. Thankfully, Michelle understood immediately and allowed me to break my lease without hesitation. After I moved, the note stopped. The knocking stopped. The feeling of being watched slowly faded. Most importantly, whoever had been stalking me never found my new address. That single fact ruled out many of my earlier fears. If it had been a coworker, they likely would have known where I'd gone. Instead, The nightmare ended with the house, but one question has never left me. How long had that person been watching before they ever knocked? Because people don't learn your name by accident. I'll admit something that isn't exactly flattering. During college, I probably spent far too much time chasing women. Back then, it felt harmless, exciting. Looking back now, it almost got me killed. I attended college in California. Whether it was unique to that campus or simply college culture in general, everything revolved around parties, hookups, and meeting new people. After joining the Pike fraternity during my sophomore year, I quickly realized something that bothered me. Everyone seemed to know everyone. Every attractive girl I met had already dated, hooked up with, or at least flirted with multiple guys I knew. The whole social scene began feeling strangely small, so I decided to try something different. I downloaded Tinder. Within a few days, I matched with a girl named Yell. Her profile caught my attention immediately. Funny, confident, beautiful. Our conversations flowed effortlessly. She seemed genuinely interested. After chatting for several days, we agreed to meet at one of my favorite college bars, Tap House, on a Saturday night. I actually arrived early, partly because I didn't want to keep her waiting, partly because Tap House had pool tables and I'd been playing pool since I was 10 years old. I wanted to warm up. An hour passed, then another drink. Eventually, I accepted what every guy dreads. I'd been stood up. I was debating whether to salvage the evening or head back to my apartment and spend the rest of the night playing online chess when my phone buzzed.
A message.
I'm here. Relief washed over me. I looked toward the entrance and immediately recognized her from her photos. She apologized repeatedly for being late. I shrugged it off. People run late. It happens. The night improved quickly. We ordered drinks, played several games of pool, laughed, talked about college, travel, music, and family. She was charismatic, almost effortlessly so. She also drank far more than I expected. Not wanting to seem boring, I tried matching her pace. Big mistake. Within a couple of hours, the room had begun spinning just enough that I knew I was far more intoxicated than I should have been. Somewhere between another round of drinks and another game of pool, she smiled, held out her phone, and casually asked, "Can I have your Instagram?" At the time, it felt like an innocent question. Looking back now, that was the exact moment the night quietly stopped being a date and started becoming something much darker. The night should have ended with nothing more than a few drinks and an awkward first date. Instead, it became the single most terrifying experience of my life. When she asked for my Instagram, I didn't think twice. It felt completely normal. People exchange social media accounts on first dates all the time. I unlocked my phone, handed it to her for a moment, and she quickly followed my account. Less than 10 seconds later, my phone vibrated. Then again, I looked down. Several explicit photographs had just appeared in our direct messages. For a second, I genuinely thought she had sent them by mistake. I looked up, confused. She simply smiled. Then she leaned closer and whispered, "Your turn?" If I had been sober, dozens of warning signs probably would have gone off in my head. Why would two people sitting less than 5 feet apart exchange intimate photos through Instagram instead of simply flirting in person? Why the rush? Why now? But alcohol has a cruel way of silencing common sense. Instead of questioning it, I laughed. I convinced myself she was simply being bold. Without thinking about the consequences, I did exactly what she asked. At the time, it seemed harmless. Looking back, that was the exact moment I unknowingly stepped into someone else's trap. The rest of the evening passed almost too perfectly. We ordered another round of drinks, played another game of pool, talked about music, travel, and college life. She was charming, relaxed, confident. Nothing about her behavior suggested that every conversation, every smile, and every drink had been leading toward a carefully planned destination. By closing time, I was barely able to stand. The room tilted every time I turned my head. I had intended to invite her back to my apartment. Before I could ask, she smiled and said, "Why don't you stay at my place instead?" At the time, it sounded like exactly what every 20-year-old college guy hoped to hear. I agreed immediately. Outside, we called an Uber. I remember leaning against the window during the ride, trying not to get sick. Only later did I realize we'd crossed into Oakland. Had I been sober, I probably would have paid closer attention to where we were going. Instead, I simply followed her. The apartment building looked ordinary enough. Nothing about it stood out. She unlocked the front door, smiled, and stepped aside. "You first." I walked inside. 2 steps, maybe 3. Then, the apartment door slammed shut behind me. Everything went dark. Not dim, not poorly lit. Completely black. For one brief second, I assumed she was searching for the light switch. I turned around to ask. Then the lights came on. Every instinct inside me screamed at once. The woman I'd spent the evening with was no longer the most important person in the room. Standing directly in front of the entrance were two enormous bald men wearing sleeveless shirts. Their hands were folded calmly in front of them. They weren't surprised to see me. They'd been waiting. Slowly I turned around. Another man stood only a few feet away, blocking every possible exit. The alcohol disappeared from my mind almost instantly. I've often tried to remember every detail of that apartment. The furniture, the walls, the decorations, but trauma has a strange way of erasing unimportant details while preserving only the moments that matter. I don't remember the color of the walls. I don't remember the layout. I remember only the faces, the silence, and the feeling that I had just walked willingly into a cage. I couldn't run. I couldn't fight. My body simply froze. The man standing closest to me smiled. Then, without looking at anything in his hands, he calmly began reciting information about me. My full name, my birthday, my age, one detail after another. Each word landed like another brick, crushing my chest. How did he know all of that? Then, he delivered the sentence that made my blood run cold. The girl you were just with is 17. Time seemed to stop. Whether that claim was true or not no longer mattered in that moment. He continued speaking in an emotionless voice. He reminded me that explicit photographs had been exchanged only minutes earlier. He explained exactly how easily that could destroy someone's life. Then came the demand. He said I now belonged to them. If I refused to cooperate with whatever they wanted, my reputation and possibly my future would disappear overnight. The threat wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. The calmness in his voice was far more frightening. Meanwhile, the two men behind me silently collected everything I had. My phone, my wallet, my keys. I handed each item over without resistance. There was no point arguing, no point pretending I had any control left. I asked what they wanted from me. The man answered without hesitation. He claimed to be involved in a large criminal organization operating throughout Northern California. He explained that they expected me to use my connections at my university and fraternity to help expand their reach. Even now, years later, I don't remember every word that followed. Shock has a way of blurring conversations. I remember only fragments, orders, threats, warnings. Then they pushed a sheet of paper toward me. Right. They wanted my home address. Then they ordered me to write down the names and phone numbers of as many students as I could remember. I hesitated. Immediately, one of the men shoved my phone into my hands. You'll need this. He never let go of it. Instead, he held it while I scrolled through my contacts. All three men stood close enough that I could feel them breathing. Every possible escape route was blocked. Every movement was being watched. I realized something terrifying. I wasn't negotiating. I wasn't even making choices anymore. I had become someone else's problem to manage. Someone else's tool. I don't know what happened inside my head next. Maybe survival instinct finally overpowered fear. Maybe the alcohol made me reckless. Or maybe I simply understood that if I stayed another minute, I might never leave. The opportunity appeared for less than a second. One of the men shifted his weight. Another glanced toward the paper. That was enough. I ran. Not thought. Not planned. Just ran. I burst through the same door I'd entered earlier and sprinted into the night without looking back. I could hear shouting behind me. Doors opening. Heavy footsteps. I didn't stop. I couldn't. The problem was, escaping the apartment didn't mean I was safe. I was still alone, intoxicated, and completely unfamiliar with one of the most dangerous neighborhoods I'd ever visited. Every passing vehicle sounded like it was coming for me. Every shadow felt alive. Eventually, I reached a quiet residential street. The first house with lights still on became my only hope. I pounded on the front door with everything I had. A family answered. I must have looked completely insane, sweating, shaking, barely able to breathe. I begged them to let me inside. Begged to use their phone. Begged them to call the police. Thankfully, they believed me. Officers arrived quickly. I told them everything I could remember. The bar, the woman, the apartment, the men, the threats. There was only one problem. I had absolutely no idea where the apartment actually was. I hadn't paid attention during the Uber ride. Still, one officer asked if I thought I could retrace my route on foot. Surprisingly, I could. Somehow my body remembered what my mind had forgotten. Guided by fragments of memory, I led officers back through the streets. Eventually, we reached the building. The police entered while I remained inside a patrol car. Those few minutes felt like hours. When the officers finally returned, their expressions told me everything before they even spoke. The apartment was empty. No furniture. No people. No obvious evidence that anyone had been living there. It looked as though the occupants had vanished into thin air. The investigation didn't end there. To their credit, detectives treated my report seriously. They spent weeks following leads, reviewing evidence, and attempting to identify the people involved. The working theory eventually pointed toward organized criminal activity, a sophisticated setup, a carefully planned operation targeting vulnerable people. Whether every detail of what I'd been told inside that apartment was true or simply part of a larger scheme, I'll probably never know. No arrests were ever made. No suspects were publicly identified. As the years passed, the case quietly disappeared beneath countless other crimes. Oakland has seen more violence and tragedy than most cities ever should. My story became just another file buried in a cabinet somewhere. But for me, it never disappeared. I deleted every dating app shortly afterward, not because I stopped believing good people exist, but because I learned something that night. Sometimes the most dangerous trap isn't hidden in a dark alley. Sometimes it smiles at you across a pool table. It laughs at your jokes. It buys another round of drinks. And by the time you realize you're no longer on a date, you're already standing inside someone else's nightmare. Before you judge me for what I'm about to say, understand that I've been trying to change. I've smoked cigarettes every single day for years. Nicotine gradually stopped being a habit and became something closer to a dependency. Recently, I even started seeing a therapist in hopes of finally breaking the addiction. So far, it hasn't worked. Ironically, the only thing worse than my smoking habit has always been my sleep schedule. For reasons I still can't explain, I rarely fall asleep before 3 or 4 in the morning. Most days, I don't get out of bed until nearly noon. I've spent months trying to fix both problems. Neither has been easy. At the time, I had no idea those two habits, late nights and constant cigarette breaks, were about to place me in the middle of something I still struggle to explain. It all began a few months ago. People often assume that addictions are always destructive. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they accidentally save your life. For years, my nightly routine never changed. No matter how exhausted I was, I always ended the day the same way. One last cigarette. One last look at the silent neighborhood from the balcony. Then bed. It was an unhealthy habit, but it gave me a strange sense of peace. The neighborhood where I lived was isolated enough that the silence almost felt unnatural. Every house sat on a large piece of land separated by trees and long driveways. At night, there were no pedestrians, almost no passing traffic, and very few lights besides the occasional porch lamp glowing in the distance. From my second-floor balcony, I could see over one particular neighbor's privacy fence. We had never spoken. I didn't even know his name. The only thing I knew about him was his routine. Every morning, the same navy blue BMW sat in his driveway. Every evening, the lights inside his house switched off around the same time. He appeared to live completely alone. Then one night, everything changed. Parked directly in front of his house was a black cargo van. No company logo, no license plate frame, no identifying markings, just a plain black van. At first, I barely thought about it. Maybe he had visitors. Maybe someone was helping him move furniture. There were countless ordinary explanations. The next night, the van returned. Exactly the same place. Exactly the same time. By the third night, I found myself waiting to see if it would appear again. I kept telling myself I wasn't being nosy, curious, maybe obsessive, probably. I've always had that tendency. It's honestly one of the reasons several friendships quietly faded over the years. When something catches my attention, I can't stop thinking about it until I understand it. So every evening I stepped onto my balcony with a cigarette and quietly watched. The van became part of my nightly routine. Nothing happened. No one got hit out. No deliveries. No conversations. Just a silent black vehicle sitting in front of an equally silent house. Then came the morning that changed everything. It was unusually late, almost 5 o'clock. The sky had just begun turning gray. I was finishing my final cigarette before going to bed when my neighbor finally appeared. It was the first time I'd ever actually seen him outside. He emerged from the house carrying something long and black. At first I assumed it was a golf bag. Then I realized it wasn't shaped quite right. It seemed heavier, much heavier. Every few steps he adjusted his grip as though whatever was inside weighed far more than sporting equipment ever could. He reached the van, carefully slid the side door open. Almost gently, he laid the bag inside. Not tossed, not shoved, placed, as though he didn't want to damage whatever it contained, or disturb it. Seconds later, he climbed into the driver's seat and disappeared into the darkness. I remained frozen on my balcony long after the taillights vanished. My imagination immediately began filling in answers I desperately hoped were wrong. Eventually, exhaustion forced me to bed. but I couldn't stop thinking about that bag. The following evening, I decided I wasn't leaving anything to chance. I carried my laptop onto the balcony, pretending to work while secretly waiting. Hours passed. 10 o'clock. 11. Midnight. Nothing. Finally, around 1 in the morning, the van returned. Its engine remained running. No movement. 5 full minutes passed. Then the driver's door opened. My neighbor stepped out. He walked to the sliding door, opened it, and reached inside. This time, whatever was in the bag seemed considerably heavier. His shoulders strained. His knees bent beneath the weight. He struggled with every step toward the house. Watching him almost felt wrong. The effort wasn't fake. He genuinely looked as though he was carrying something incredibly dense. When both he and the bag disappeared inside, I realized I no longer believed there was any innocent explanation. Something was terribly wrong. The question was, what? I barely slept. The next morning, I flipped a coin. Heads. I would forget everything. Tails. I'd follow him. It landed on tails. That night, I positioned myself on the balcony shortly before 4 in the morning, cigarette burning between my fingers, keys already in my pocket. The moment I saw movement below, I hurried downstairs. I slipped into my car and deliberately left my headlights off. My heart pounded as the van rolled away from the house. Only after it reached the main road did I quietly begin following. 20 minutes passed. The further we drove, the fewer houses remained. Eventually, the van turned onto what barely resembled a road anymore, just an overgrown dirt trail disappearing into dense woodland. I hesitated, then followed. Branches scraped against my car. The trees gradually opened into a clearing. There, standing alone among the forest, was an abandoned gas station, weathered, dark, forgotten. Parked outside it was the navy blue BMW that normally sat in my neighbor's driveway. Every instinct screamed for me to leave. Instead, I backed my car away and waited near the entrance to the dirt road. Nearly an hour passed. Finally, the BMW emerged alone. No Vaughn, no other vehicles, just him. Once he disappeared down the highway, I returned. The clearing felt unnaturally silent. No birds, no insects, nothing. The abandoned station looked frozen in time. Its faded signs swayed gently in the wind. The front entrance was locked. So was the side door. Then the back. Every entrance had been carefully secured. Why would an abandoned building be locked so tightly? Curiosity overwhelmed caution. Several grimy windows lined one wall. I tested each one. None moved. I should have left. Instead, I picked up a rock. One swing, glass exploded inward. Immediately, an alarm erupted so loudly that it echoed through the forest. Not an old mechanical alarm, a modern security system. My stomach dropped. Someone had invested money protecting this place. That meant it wasn't abandoned at all. I ran. Every survival instinct took over. I sprinted back to my car, expecting someone to emerge from the woods at any second. As I sped away, I called 911. I gave the dispatcher the location as best I could, explained that something suspicious was happening, and ended the call before panic completely overwhelmed me. I barely slept that morning. When daylight finally arrived, I stepped onto my balcony, expecting normality. Instead, my neighbor's property looked like a crime scene. Police cruisers lined the driveway. Detectives moved in and out of the house. Officers carried evidence boxes toward waiting vehicles. Finally, my neighbor appeared. His hands were cuffed behind his back. He never looked toward my house, never looked up. He simply disappeared into the back of a patrol car. I stood there holding an unlit cigarette for nearly 20 minutes. No one explained what had happened. No officer ever knocked on my door. I contacted investigators more than once, hoping for answers. Every time I received the same response: no comment. Months later, I tried returning to the old gas station. The dirt road had been permanently blocked. Fresh fencing, warning signs, heavy gates. Whatever had happened there, someone wanted it forgotten. Sometimes I still wonder what had been inside that black bag. Sometimes I wonder whether breaking that window exposed something much larger than I was ever meant to see. And every once in a while, when I'm standing on my balcony late at night, I catch myself staring toward that empty driveway, half hoping, half terrified, that another black van might quietly return. I've never suffered from sleep paralysis, never experienced night terrors. I've always been the kind of person who falls asleep within minutes and sleeps so deeply that thunderstorms rarely wake me. That's why everything that happened afterward terrified me so much. Nightmares never really bothered me. In fact, I've always joked that they're like free horror movies, fully immersive, painfully realistic, and thankfully over the moment you wake up, Most people think that's a strange way to look at it. Maybe it is. But waking up safe after surviving something horrifying inside a dream always gave me a strange sense of relief. At least, it used to. This happened several years ago during one of the hottest Julys I can remember. I was living with my roommate Patricia, everyone called her Trish. Our schedules were completely opposite. She worked early mornings. I worked evenings. Most days we barely crossed paths except for brief conversations on weekends. The apartment was unbearably hot during the summer. Every night I ran the old window air conditioner at full blast. Its constant mechanical hum filled the bedroom with a steady blanket of white noise that usually helped me sleep without interruption. Around that same time, my relationship had just ended. The breakup left me emotionally exhausted. I wasn't eating properly. I wasn't sleeping well. Every day felt heavier than the last. Then came the dream. At first, everything seemed strangely peaceful. I found myself standing inside a dining room that looked vaguely familiar yet somehow impossible to recognize. A long wooden table stretched across the center of the room. Every member of my family sat around it. My parents, my grandparents, several relatives. No one spoke. No one smiled. No one even looked at one another. They simply sat there, perfectly still, as though waiting for something. Across the table, directly facing me, someone else was standing, and the moment my eyes met theirs, I felt something no nightmare had ever made me feel before. Not fear, recognition, as though whoever or whatever was standing there already knew me far better than I knew myself. At first, I couldn't even find the right words to describe what I had seen. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't an animal, and it certainly wasn't human. The closest comparison I can make is that it resembled one of the extraterrestrials from Times, Signs, Times, except this thing was far more grotesque. Its body looked unnaturally thin, almost skeletal, but its hands ended in long black claws, and two jagged horns curved backward from its head. It was exactly what most people imagine when they hear the phrase sleep paralysis demon. The only difference was, I wasn't experiencing sleep paralysis. I was still dreaming. At least I thought I was. The creature stood at the opposite end of the room, completely motionless. It didn't blink. It didn't breathe. It simply stared directly at me. There was something horrifying about the way it watched me. It wasn't angry. It wasn't aggressive. It looked patient. Then, without warning, it was suddenly standing beside me. I never saw it move. One moment it was across the room. The next it was inches away, towering over me. Pure instinct took over. I turned and ran. Somehow the dream shifted, and suddenly I found myself inside what looked like my own bedroom, or at least my mind's distorted version of it. Doors were in the wrong places. The shadows were too dark. The room felt familiar enough to recognize, yet wrong enough to terrify me. That's the last thing I remember before waking. I opened my eyes to complete darkness. The only sound was the steady roar of my window air conditioner humming at full power. My heart pounded so violently that I could hear it over the white noise. I looked around the room, expecting, almost fearing, to see something standing beside the bed. Nothing. Just darkness. I laughed nervously to myself. It was just a nightmare. Eventually, I lay back down and forced myself to sleep. The following night, something happened that should have been impossible. I woke sometime after midnight. Immediately, something felt different. My bedroom door stood wide open. I almost never slept with it open. Unless I had been drinking, I always closed it before bed. Still half asleep, I assumed my roommate Patricia, everyone called her Trish, had opened it to check whether I had come home. I got up, closed the door, returned to bed. The next morning I texted her, "Did you come into my room last night?" Her reply came almost instantly, "No." That answer bothered me. Still, I convinced myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe I'd gone to the bathroom while half asleep. Maybe I'd wandered into the kitchen. People sleepwalk all the time. I tried not to think about it. The third night, the nightmare returned. This time there was no family, no dining room, no familiar surroundings, only darkness. An enormous empty room stretched endlessly around me. The creature stood on the opposite side, watching. It never actually walked toward me. That's what disturbed me most. It simply became closer. Every time I looked away, it had shortened the distance. No footsteps, no movement, no sound. Just closer, 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 until suddenly it was standing over me. I tried to run. My body wouldn't move. I tried to scream. Nothing came out. The creature slowly raised one of its hands. Its claws reflected what little light existed in that impossible room. Then it drove one claw across my upper thigh. The pain exploded through me. Not Dream pain. Real pain. Sharp. Burning. Agonizing. Everything went black. The next thing I remember was opening my eyes. Again, dark room, air conditioner roaring, exactly like the previous night. For several seconds I simply lay there breathing heavily. Then I felt it, a burning sensation on my thigh. I reached down. My fingers brushed something wet, uneven, raised. Every trace of sleep disappeared. I jumped out of bed and ran into the bathroom. The overhead light flickered on. I looked into the mirror. A long, fresh scratch stretched across my upper thigh, deep enough to break the skin. I screamed. Trish burst awake as I ran into her room. She switched on the light and immediately stared at my leg. "What the hell happened to you?" "I don't know." The words sounded insane even as I said them. Together we searched my room. We stripped every blanket off the bed, checked beneath the sheets, examined the mattress, looked for exposed springs, broken furniture, anything sharp, anything that could possibly explain the injury. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. We stood there in complete confusion. Then Trish suddenly raised a finger. "Wait." She walked across the room, pressed the power button. The air conditioner shut off. For the first time in days, the room became completely silent, and that's when we heard it. A sound. Soft, barely audible, not scratching, not breathing. More like the faint movement another person naturally makes, simply by existing in the same room. It was coming from beneath my bed. Neither of us screamed. Looking back, I'm still amazed we managed to stay calm. Our eyes slowly met. Neither of us needed to say a word. We both knew exactly what we had heard. Without taking another step into the room, we backed away, walked into the hallway, left the apartment. Only once we reached the neighboring unit did we begin pounding on the door. An elderly man answered. We probably looked completely hysterical. We told him someone was inside our apartment. To his credit, he didn't question us. He immediately let us inside and handed us his phone. Within minutes, police were on their way. While we waited, a loud slam echoed outside our apartment door. We all looked toward the window. Too late. Whoever had been inside was already gone. When officers searched the apartment, they found no one. No signs of forced entry. No fingerprints that led anywhere. Nothing. But the apartment told its own story. We had fled so suddenly that every light remained switched on. The bed was completely overturned. Closets stood open. Whoever had been hiding beneath that bed knew exactly what had happened. They knew we had discovered them. They simply waited until we left. Only afterward did I fully understand my nightmares. The creature wasn't supernatural. It was symbolic. My subconscious had noticed something before my conscious mind ever did. The open bedroom door. The strange feeling of being watched. Tiny noises beneath the constant roar of the air conditioner. The nightmares weren't predicting danger. They were translating it. The monster wasn't a demon. It was an intruder. A real human being hiding beneath my bed while I slept. The first nightmare suddenly made horrifying sense. If my bedroom door had been open that previous night, then someone had probably already entered my room. Maybe they wandered through the apartment. Maybe they watched me sleeping. Maybe they searched through our belongings. Maybe they even stood beside my bed. In the second nightmare, that scratch, the creature's claw, it wasn't imaginary at all. Someone had actually reached out from beneath my bed and dragged something sharp across my leg while I slept deeply enough not to wake. Even now, years later, the physical scar has faded. But what truly changed forever wasn't my leg. It was my relationship with sleep. Before then, nightmares were entertainment. Little horror films my brain created for itself. Now, whenever I wake suddenly in the middle of the night, I no longer ask myself, what was I dreaming? Instead, I ask something infinitely more terrifying. What woke me up? The next story happened when I was about 6 or 7 years old, back when my family lived in our old house in Suffolk County on Long Island. Children often remember fear differently than adults. You don't analyze it. You don't search for logical explanations. You simply know that something feels wrong. Our house had an unusual layout. The entire upstairs had once been a separate apartment rented to an elderly woman years before. After she moved away, the second floor became my older brother Luke's and my kingdom. At the top of the staircase, our enormous bedroom occupied what had once been her living room. Straight ahead sat the bathroom. To the right remained the tiny bedroom and an old kitchen that was rarely used. Because our bedroom was so large, it became a paradise for 2 young boys. Toys covered nearly every corner. Shelves overflowed with board games. Action figures lay scattered everywhere. Two crawl-space closets stretched along opposite walls, both packed with forgotten treasures collected over the years. Among all those toys was one old race car. It wasn't particularly special. It had several large buttons across the top. Each button triggered flashing headlights and different sound effects, engine revving tire, squeals honking, even a short rock melody. It had belonged to Luke years before eventually becoming both of ours. By the time this happened, the battery should have been nearly dead. One summer night, Luke and I lay awake in bed talking quietly before falling asleep. The room was completely dark. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound. Then, without warning, the toy exploded to life. The roar of its tiny engine suddenly echoed through the bedroom like a jump scare in a horror movie. Its headlights flashed violently across the walls. The electronic engine revved by itself. The sound shattered the silence so suddenly that my entire body jerked. I immediately sat upright. My first instinct was to accuse Luke. "Stop it," I shouted. "You're trying to scare me." Luke burst into laughter. Not because he had done it, but because my reaction terrified him almost as much as the toy itself. Between laughs, he insisted he hadn't touched it. The problem was, neither of us had been anywhere near the race car. It was sitting alone, right in the center of the room. The toy suddenly fell silent. The flashing headlights blinked one last time. Then darkness swallowed the room again. For several long seconds, neither my brother nor I spoke. The only sound was our breathing. I was only 6 or 7 years old, but I remember that moment with impossible clarity. Fear doesn't blur memories, it burns them into you forever. Luke kept insisting he hadn't touched the toy. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But believing him meant accepting something even more terrifying, that the toy had turned itself on. Eventually, exhaustion overcame fear. Children have a strange ability to fall asleep even after terrifying experiences. Looking back now, I realize my mind was desperately searching for a logical explanation. Maybe the batteries were dying. Maybe one of the buttons had become stuck. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. For weeks, nothing happened. Life slowly returned to normal. The race car sat exactly where it always had forgotten, among piles of toys scattered across our enormous bedroom. Then one night, the silence returned. Luke and I were lying awake again when we both heard it. Thud. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Something heavy had landed somewhere inside our bedroom. We both froze. Luke immediately seized the opportunity to tease me. "Oh," he whispered dramatically. "There's a ghost in here." "Shut up," I snapped. "I'm getting Mom." He laughed harder. He knew I was terrified of the dark. Every shadow became a monster in my imagination. Every strange noise felt like proof that something impossible was lurking nearby. Then both of us stopped laughing. A faint glow appeared in the far corner of the room. Our eyes slowly turned toward it. The race car. Its headlights had turned on again. Not flashing randomly, not flickering because of weak batteries. They simply illuminated the darkness as though someone had quietly pressed the power button. Neither of us had moved. Neither of us was anywhere near it. The room instantly felt colder. Without thinking, I threw off my blanket and sprinted out of the bedroom. I nearly tripped racing down the stairs, screaming for my parents. I burst into their bedroom, barely able to breathe. "There's something upstairs." There was a noise. The car turned on again. I was crying so hard my words barely made sense. Luke followed moments later. My mother immediately looked at him. "Luke, enough. If you're trying to scare your brother, stop." Luke shook his head. "I didn't do anything. How could I? I was still in bed." That question hung in the room. Neither parent answered. Looking back now, I think even they didn't know what to believe. My mother eventually let me sleep beside them that night. I remember feeling embarrassed, but fear outweighed pride. Their bedroom felt like the only safe place left in the house. Months passed afterward. Nothing happened. The strange incidents slowly faded into family history. The race car, however, never felt normal again. I refused to keep it in our bedroom. Eventually, my parents moved it into the small spare room across the hallway. Out of sight, out of mind, or so we hoped. One evening, Luke wasn't home. He had gone to spend the night with one of his friends. For the first time in a long while, I had the enormous upstairs bedroom entirely to myself. My mother tucked me into bed. Before she left, I begged her to keep the bedroom door open. She smiled, kissed my forehead, promised everything was fine, then disappeared downstairs. I lay awake, staring into the dimly lit hallway. The house was unusually quiet, too quiet. Every creak of old wood sounded amplified. Every shifting pipe echoed through the walls. Time seemed to crawl. I wasn't even close to falling asleep. Then I heard it, a faint sound from somewhere down the hallway. Not footsteps. Not scraping. Something else. A slow, plastic rolling noise. At first I thought I was imagining it, then it became louder. Closer. Closer. My entire body stiffened. I slowly rolled over to face the bedroom doorway. What I saw has stayed with me for the rest of my life. The race car slowly rolled into my bedroom, by itself. Its headlights were glowing brightly. The tiny engine noises crackled through the silence as though someone invisible was pushing it forward. It wasn't racing. It wasn't speeding. It moved almost deliberately, almost purposefully, straight toward my bed. Every instinct inside me shattered. A scream tore out of my chest before I even realized I was making a sound. I slammed myself backward until my shoulders hit the wall behind my bed. I couldn't take my eyes off the toy. It finally stopped several feet away from me. Its lights remained on, pointing directly toward the bed, almost as though it had found exactly where it wanted to be. Seconds later, my parents came charging upstairs. My father reached the room first. What happened? I could barely answer through sobs. Someone pushed it. Someone pushed the car into my room. My father immediately searched the entire upstairs. Every closet, every crawl space, under every bed, the spare bedroom, the old kitchen, the bathroom. Nothing. No open windows, no hidden person, no possible explanation. Only the toy, sitting motionless on the wooden floor. My parents exchanged a look I still remember. It wasn't the expression adults wear when humoring a frightened child. It was uncertainty. My mother wanted to believe there had to be a reasonable explanation. Maybe the batteries were malfunctioning. Maybe gravity had somehow caused it to roll. Maybe. Anything. But there was one problem. That toy had never been designed to move by itself. It had lights. It had sound effects. It had buttons. It had no motor. No remote control. No wheels capable of driving independently. It simply rolled. My father didn't say another word. He picked the toy up, carried it downstairs, walked outside. A few moments later, we heard the unmistakable sound of plastic smashing against concrete. Then again, and again, and again. He returned, empty-handed. I threw it away. Later, I learned he hadn't merely thrown it away. He had smashed it into pieces first before placing it in the neighbor's trash can just in case I tried retrieving it. He wanted to erase it from existence. Maybe to comfort me. Maybe to comfort himself. For several weeks afterward, I refused to sleep upstairs. Eventually, my father insisted it was time to face my fear. Life slowly returned to normal. Nothing like that ever happened again. Now, as an adult, I've spent years searching for explanations. Faulty electronics, faulty memories, childhood imagination, sleep deprivation, suggestibility. I've considered every rational possibility, yet none of them explain the final night. None explain how a toy stored across the hallway rolled into my bedroom while its lights glowed in complete darkness. Perhaps there is an explanation waiting to be discovered. Or perhaps some experiences exist solely to remind us that not everything in this world obeys the rules we believe we understand. Whether it was coincidence, something unseen, or something that once lingered inside that old apartment before my family ever moved upstairs, I may never know. But one thing has remained unchanged ever since those nights. Whenever I hear an old electronic toy suddenly activate by itself in an otherwise silent house, every instinct tells me the same thing. Don't walk toward the sound, because sometimes the thing making the noise isn't the toy. It's whatever wanted you to notice it.